have three specialists. We have therapist Mika Lee, Dr. Annie Lee, and also Counselor Adeline Zhao to join us for a panel discussion on mental health. In this panel discussion, we will discuss what mental health actually is and how do we become aware of our own mental health, and also how we offer support to our friends and families who are experiencing mental health issues. And most importantly, how to access those services and resources. Before we start our conversation, I would like to talk a little bit about how we structure tonight's discussion. I will have our specialists introduce themselves, and after that, we will spend about 30 minutes to go through the questions that we prepared. And after that, we will actually open the floor for everybody. If you have a questions, you are very welcome to put it in the QA section, and I will go through those questions, and I have our specialists answer those questions. And if you prefer to ask questions in Cantonese, in Chinese or Mandarin, you're also very welcome to just put those questions in Chinese in the QA section, and our specialists will do our best to answer them in either Mandarin or Cantonese. And me and also my colleague Neil would do our best to help you translate those questions, those answers. And sorry about that, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Dennis Yue Li. I am the Director of Performance Storytelling and Community at the Museum of Chinese in America. Just a little note for the QA. Let's try to ask questions that can benefit a lot, most of the participants tonight, as opposed to asking your own personal questions about your family and friends, so that way, we actually get, equal chance for everybody to understand and the purpose of this discussion. And if you like to, continue maybe a conversation with one of our specialists, you're very welcome. In the end of this session, we will try to give you some resources and some information, and maybe later on you can reach out individually. Yeah. Okay, so let's begin. So I would first of all like to welcome our panelists. Mika, would you like to introduce yourself to our attendees?
Sure. Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. I don't know where you actually zoom in from. My name is Mika Lee, and I am a New York State licensed creative arts therapist and a registered drama therapist with North American Drama Therapy Association. Basically, that means I am a psychotherapist, and I utilize different creative art therapy approaches to help my patient and my clients. Currently, I work at Amherst Hospital in Queens, New York, in the acute care inpatient psychiatric setting with adolescents and children. Usually, I do individual therapy and group therapy with my patients on the unit. And outside of the hospital, I also provide individual counseling sessions with my private clients. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Mika. What about you, Dr. Annie Lee?
Likewise, thank you so much for having me on this panel, and greetings to all of you, and thank you for taking the time to join us in this very important dialogue. So my name is Dr. Annie Lee. I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And what does that mean? As a psychiatrist, it means that I'm a physician whose area of focus is in mental health. I attended medical school, completed an adult psychiatry residency, and then subsequently specialized training in child and adolescent psychiatry before coming on and being an attending as a full certified child adolescent psychiatrist. What that allows me to do is that in addition to thinking about different various approaches in therapy, I'm also able to prescribe medications that are appropriate for certain mental health conditions. Currently, my role is I'm the director of the Bellevue Comprehensive Psychiatric Emergency Program for child and adolescent psychiatry. So I am a pediatric emergency psychiatrist in my day job. And I'm also an immigrant and, a member of the Asian American community, and, find it very important to be empowering and addressing the needs of Asian American mental health in adolescents and families.
Thank you and welcome, Dr. Annie Lee. Last but not least, we have our counselor, Adeline Zhao.
Hello, everyone. It is an honor to be here tonight for this panel. So I am a mental health counselor at Garden of Hope, which is a nonprofit organization that serves the majority, the Asian community, Asian immigrant community. And I personally work with a wider range of, age groups with a focus on the first generation 1.5 and the second generation of the Asian community, Asian youth specifically. And the work that I do is, work with the teens who struggle with identity formation, mood disorders, or family relations, and other mental illnesses. And we do both, individual counseling and a group counseling, both in English and in Chinese as well. So yeah, that's what I do.
All right, thank you so much and welcome, Adeline. So my first question to the three of you is, what exactly is mental health or behavioral health? That is also another term that we hear a lot, and why is it important? Mika, would
I
you
can
like
go
to?
ahead and start, or
Okay.
Mika can go.
No, Dr. Annie,
Go
please.
ahead, Annie. Sure.
So when we think about mental health, and I think about it in Chinese, it's called, like in Cantonese, it's called 精神. And I really think that it's that area of our health that relates to our thoughts, our emotions, and also our behaviors, and how it all relates to our day-to-day lives, our capacity to go to work, take care of our families, pay the bills, do the things that allow us to be functional in our day-to-day lives. And, a healthy balance is important because it allows us to be able to thrive in all those areas of our lives and how we relate to other people. And so when that's out of balance, it can really impact our functioning. And so it's really important that we kind of become aware of, the things like our emotions, our thoughts and behaviors, because it interrelates to the way we are, approaching our day-to-day life.
And just to kind of add on to that, really, it's our general psychological and emotional well-being and wellness, actually. And sometimes, it's all, like Dr. Lee was saying, it's all interrelated. Sometimes our mood influences our behavior as well. Sometimes our mood influences how we think as well. And sometimes when the state of mind actually influence our behavior, that's when you will see a lot of the mental illness kind of get into play when it comes to people's behavior, such as, you started to have a bad sleeping habit, right? A lot of the time, in Asian community, we kind of like notice about the different physical changes first. Oh, I couldn't sleep for a while. I go to my PCP first to see what's going on with my sleep. And sometimes people started to eat really poorly. And that's really like the behavioral health part that's influenced by your mental well-being, right? Sometimes you feel anxious, sometimes you feel depressed or stressed, and that influences your sleep, your eating habits, your socialization. A lot of the time, the isolation is so real, right? Like if you don't have any motivation to go out because of your mental stress, then that influences your behavior. You're isolating yourself, and sometimes you don't perform well at work. And sometimes we can take a look at different substances that people are using, and that's part of the behavioral health as well.
Thank you very much. Adeline, would you like to add on anything?
I think Mika and Dr. Ennis really said, the essence of what mental health really is. Basically it's just a psychological state. It involves your emotions, your psychological health, and your social well-being. So I think I'm just gonna go ahead and talk a little bit about like why it is important, because one thing for me to think about it is that mental health is really tightly connected to your physical health. Like Mika already mentioned, sometimes when you don't have a good sleep schedule or a good diet, you would go to the physician to get a checkup. And the same for the mental health as well. A proper diet, sleep, and exercise can positively impact your mental health. And conversely, lack of sleep and a poor diet and a lack of exercise can impede your ability to manage stress and the life demands. So just like how we care for physical health, we encourage people, even ourselves, to exercise, take supplements when needed, have healthy diets. We also encourage people to care for the mental health, which, then we will have the ability to learn, to feel, to express, and manage emotions, and to grow and maintain relationships, and to cope and manage stress. And it's a joke, but my colleague calls it the mental immune system. We all have the physical immune system, but we also need the mental immune system as well.
Thank you so much, Adeline. And as today, we might have noticed that our three specialists, they actually come from different backgrounds. We have therapists, we have psychiatrists, we also have a counselor. So I would like to, understand a little bit more, what are the differences? Because, there are so many services out there. Sometimes it's social worker, sometimes it's therapy, and then MOCA is specialized in creative arts therapy, and Dr. Annie Lee is a psychiatrist. So what are the differences?
Dr. Lee, we like to kind of maybe approach it in a medication management perspective, just to mention about your specialty first, and then I'll talk a little bit about different mental health practitioners in New York State.
Yeah, so when we think about mental health and behavioral health, right, there are so many approaches of how we can promote wellness. And so I am trained in a very medical model because I am, first and foremost, a doctor and a physician, and then having completed the medical sciences. My role is to kind of take a very biological approach sometimes to how we approach certain, mental health conditions, because we know that there are certain mental health conditions that are basically a function of a biological process in the brain, just like how there may be problems with your liver, problems with your thyroid, or problems with your heart. Mental wellness and mental health is a big component of our biological processes. So there are times, and when appropriate, we utilize medications to optimize our mental well-being. And that's something that as a medical doctor, I'm able to do with my scientific, background and training. In addition to that, there are other approaches that during my residency training, I've been taught, including, different types of modalities of therapy, including cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, individual therapy, all different domains of different therapy that are sometimes, evidently approached for certain conditions that can be helpful. I am able to also, use those tools to help improve the mental health of the patients that I'm seeing. So I think the best way to think about it is, as a psychiatrist, I get to use the medication tools and also the therapy tools. At the same time, not everyone needs medications, right? And, sometimes therapy is just as, integral and vital, and that's sometimes what the patient needs. And there's so many different variations of therapists, and I'm going to pass it over to Micah and Adeline to talk about how they approach, their patients with their specific specialties.
Right. And thank you, Dr. Lee. And just like what Dr. Lee was mentioning, there's a lot of collaborative approaches. And then usually in the hospital, we work in a treatment team kind of setting. And, a lot of the time, you got to start somewhere, whether you start in a PCP's office, whether you start going to a psychiatrist first, or whether you start just booking a therapy session, a talk therapy session online. If you start somewhere and get properly evaluated or assessed, then the professional will lead you to the professional, the conditions that is appropriate for you. And like Dr. Lee was mentioning, that for a psychiatrist, you can actually get prescription for medications. You can also see, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Lee, you can also see a psychiatric nurse practitioner to get medication management as well. And other than the medication management, a lot of people are seeking psychotherapy. And because we are all located in New York State, and within the New York State, there are a couple of different categories when it comes to the professional. They are psychologists, they are PhD and PsyD, and they are doctoral level clinicians. They are also social worker, master level social worker, and licensed clinical social worker. That's LCSW. And under a very specific New York State umbrella term of mental health practitioners, they are different licensure. One is me, licensed creative art therapist. Another one is licensed mental health counselor. Another one is licensed marriage and family therapist. And the last one is licensed psychoanalyst. So these are all New York State approved and licensed clinicians that you can seek help from in New York State.
Thank you very much. And
yeah, no problem.
Adeline, what about you? You are a counselor.
Right. So mental health counselor is actually what Mika already mentioned about, what we do is also psychotherapy as well. So basically the steps of how we go through, is one is identify and evaluate the problem, the presenting problem or the challenges, right? And then during the second stage is the treatment. So during the treatment stage, if the medication is recommended, then we will refer them out to psychiatrists like Dr. Annie Lee for medication prescriptions. And then what we also do is assist clients to develop skills and strategies, because we don't want them to come in and get treated and go out there back to the community, but with the triggers and still have the same problem again coming up, so we also do the skill development and the strategies to as a preventative work as well.
Thank you very much. Now I want to continue on to our next question, and also the real purpose of our panel discussion today is that within our community, we actually have a lot of stigmas to mental health. Like Dr. Annie Lee, you use the Cantonese word, right? And in Chinese, it's like 神经, and a lot of people will use the word 神经病 to kind of like describe the mental health issues, but that's actually a very serious stigma. So I would love to hear from your experiences, what are the stigmas that you are actually dealing with day to day? And especially to the patients that, wouldn't say that they need help. Adeline, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. So I'll just speak from my own experience a little bit, a lot, because I work with the immigrant youth population, and a lot of times the most stigma I see is, heavy mental health problems, meaning that you are weak, you are not mentally strong, you're mentally unstable, and sometimes they are called to be crazy. Those are the main stigma that I've seen. And another one is the shame. If I have mental illness, that means that I am shameful, I am ashamed of myself, and also that puts shame onto my family as well. So which can be another obstacle for people to seek out mental health professional help.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mika.
Right. And, when I think about stigma, there are different layers of stigma. There are layers of negative attitude toward yourself. That's more like a self-stigma. There are also public stigma and cultural stigma, that how, that certain things are perceived by the culture, by the general public. And when it comes to Asian culture, sometimes there are actually, like Ali was saying, there were specific kind of point of view or values, the way how we think, that influence our decision to seek mental health services. And I can really just briefly mention, there's a lot of shame and guilt associated with seeking mental health. And there's a lot of like family dynamic of hiding mental health in the family, because you can't let it out, you can't let people know because they are worried, right? In the traditional culture, it's kind of, oh, people talk, people gossip, people will view our family in a certain way, and we don't want shame in our family. No, not really. So a lot of the time, during my time in acute care inpatient setting, I've been a clinician for the past 12 years, and a lot of my time were spending time with inpatient adult psychiatric setting. I serve Asian population there on the inpatient unit as well. And a lot of my adult inpatient clients, they are they're being brought into the emergency room or the hospital in a very late stage of their mental illness sometimes, and we see severe symptoms of schizophrenia. We see people going to the emergency room only because they took an overdose or they attempted, some sort of assault or aggression towards self or other people. So then their family had no choice but to bring them into the emergency room. And they were hiding their family member at home because they are, first, sometimes they don't have the knowledge about what exactly this is, right? And then just like Dennis was saying, there's a lot of, misconceptions in the culture, right? Like 神经病 or like 附身, like there is some sort of spiritual, kind of process over certain people when you talk about severe mental illness. So a lot of the time, patients who actually came to the hospital were quite sick already. And so it's, we were always kind of trying to advocate, in the community to have them really recognize the early signs of people with mental illness to prevent your family member or friends from getting sick, actually, because with proper medication management, it will be a completely different life for them. And I think that a lot of shame and guilt, a lot of emotional components of it, it's really real in a way. So I think I'm just going to stop there. And I don't know if Dr. Lee has anything.
No, I think Adeline and Mika, you guys have summarized it so well about, all the cultural aspects of it, the degree of preserving face, the idea that if you had mental, illness, that you are weak in character, and therefore defective or not normal. And those are such very confining words because I like to view everything as like a continuum and a spectrum. And so when I work in an emergency room, kind of like what Mika was talking about, in an acute care setting, and it's so unfortunate because by the time the patients and the families come to see us in the emergency room, it's really acute. We're talking about, suicide ideations that have, persisted for so long to the point where the child has already taken that overdose. Or most of the times, especially with the Asian patients, it tends to be the referral coming from the school. And then there's that intersection of school, family, mental health services, and then the family wanting to maintain the image from the school and not allowing us to collaborate with the school because they don't want that ding on their records. And part of my job is to kind of say, actually, do you know that the school is really supportive and will, accommodate and meet the needs of your child if you just let us work with them? And trying to be holistic about it and try to reassure them that don't worry, it's okay. This is not going to impact their college application process. This is not going to affect their, career pathway choices, and that with the proper treatment, people can really lead, very functional, successful lives. And that's what we want to, that's the message that we want to impart is that this is not about a defect in any way. Just like you have thyroid issues or heart issues, high blood pressure, it doesn't stop you from living our fullest lives if we get the proper treatment.
Yeah, thank you so much. It seems that, within our culture and tradition, that saving face in particular has been quite of a challenge and it contributes to the stigma. I am wondering if there are other aspects in our culture and tradition that actually also contribute, because the way that, part of your job, the difficulty is that you're not only taking care of the patients, you're also educating the patient's families and immediate circle. So it's like almost both ways. And in order for us to become more aware and also help those people who are actually seeking for help is to understand our culture. What are the other aspects that actually also contributes to the challenges of mental health within our community? Whether it's also about, our identity formation, because one of the questions that I just saw is immigrants, the language barriers. What other aspects that, in your day-to-day life, in your own practice, you are actually experiencing and would like to share with us?
I think I want to highlight a little bit. I think these are really great questions about the idea of like my parents' generation not embracing, psychotherapy, the challenges of being an Asian American immigrant. And I think back about, well, let's move ourselves to, let's say, our home countries. Maybe it might be Japan, Korea, or China, and what mental health is like over there, and the dialogue, the vocabulary, right, that we have for it and within that language to promote mental health literacy. And then we bring it over here as, Asian Americans, and then we start talking about the intersectionality, right, of ourselves as Asian, as Americans, as immigrants, and for some, maybe even LGBTQ issues, right? And how each of those intersections can really bring on a lot of different challenges from acculturation, right? Generational conflicts. What I see a lot is, generationally, a lot of our, elders have gone through their own degree of trauma before immigrating to the country. And so how they cope with it, they internalize it and, may not want to talk about it because it may bring up too much pain. And so it's kind of like, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to go there. And so it kind of creates this message of like, okay, so if we're not going to talk about it, it's kind of like the movie in Encanto. I love going back to that movie about intergenerational trauma because we don't talk about it, but it's there. It's so there. And I think that, as we, the next generation are coming up, are being more informed about mental health literacy and more about, hey, it is something to be taught. It is okay to talk about it. There's that conflict that it's inherent. And how do we reconcile that? And that takes a lot of work. And so our job has always been education, education, and education, because the more we kind of educate, we feel like that we can actually come to a meeting of the minds.
Thank you so much, Dr. Annie Lee. Yeah, Mika.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to, I just wanted to give a round of applause for the 51 people who logged into this Zoom meeting, because you are doing something to break, the generational trauma in your family by knowing more about mental health, by physically logging into this, webinar, and then just to allow yourself to sit here and listen to all this information, whether it's new to you, whether you are in the field, whether you are actually seeking help yourself, or you identify with a family member or friends, but you are taking action, you are taking that first step. And I think that at least one person in your life will be beneficial from your tuning in today. I just wanted to mention that. And thank you for actually tuning in. Yeah.
Thank you. I do want to, because Dr. Lee actually pointed out a very, very good question about, intersectionality going back to the home country. And I know, Adeline, you've been working with a lot of immigrant families. So there is also that educational part of it that you are doing. And I know also, Mika, you're a registered and licensed therapist in Taiwan. Could we talk a little bit about the country and how do you deal with the immigrant families and how do you educate them, especially connecting with this very Western idea of like psychotherapy, psychiatry?
I'll start. So I think one thing, like Dr. Annie Lee already mentioned, is that we have to recognize that there are cultural differences even within the immigrant community, and even the cultural differences from between the older generation and the newer generation, the second generation, the first generation, it's all different. So one thing that I particularly see within the population that I work with is really interesting is, the ways how we express love and affection is so different. The older from the clientele that I work with, we see a lot of separation due to work because we work with, low income families, and a lot of times the parents have to go out, are either back in their home country or in another state, or just have a really, really busy work schedule. So you see the separation. And then for the parents, providing food, like we give you food, we feed you, we clothe you, that is enough. The material needs is already met for the children. And so for the kids to ask for more that emotional needs, or that internal self-esteem, or what that just internal needs can be seen as ungrateful for parents, right? So what we do is really not only do the education, but trying to create this understanding from both parties, like for the parents to understand what the child's needs are actually are. They might be thinking more about the mental health. They might be thinking about the connections, the love, all those stuff. And for the kids, we need to educate them and also have them to show more appreciation of the parents or hardworking and everything, to bring those gap together. Because I think we do see a lot of gap between the different generations. And so that is one thing that I want to highlight. And then another thing really interesting as well is what we call 别人家的小孩, other people's child. It might be unconscious or conscious or unconscious. We sometimes hear a lot of comparison, and that can bring out a discipline method, which is a harsh verbal discipline, right? We don't see much, the physical discipline as much as we did before, but that turned into like a harsh verbal discipline, which can also have cause a lot of emotional pain and harm to kids' self-esteem. So I just want to highlight those two, from the work that I see.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Mika, what is your experience? If you want to speak from the home country that you registered as.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, in Taiwan and in New York, I work with children and adolescents. And in Taiwan, I work in a children's hospital in Taichung, and then it's an expressive art therapy outpatient center. And we take a referral from the pediatric neurologist actually to, they refer, well, I mean, sometimes they don't, like parents, they don't actually bring their kids to psychiatry initially, but they will get them evaluated by some other physicians, right? Like neurologists or just a family doctor or things like that. And I always have to structure my sessions with the children in the way of more like a family system type of work, like even though I have individual client with the children, the families, the parents, the guardians engagement is of essential. Without the parents being engaged in their therapy treatment, it's not going to be as effective at all, in a way. And a lot of the time what we actually see, it's the disattunement in the early childhood between the primary caretaker and the child. So a lot of the time that sort of pattern actually get carried as they grow up. The communication, it's disattuned, the parents is not mirroring the child properly. Sometimes they'll be like, I feed you, I let you go to school, I give you iPhone, and I treat you good enough. But a lot of the time they are not hearing what's really going on with the children. It's not holding their emotions, not holding what's really going on internally. So a lot of the time, our role to help the child is to have a really non-judgmental stand with the parents, and then just to tell the parents, hey, we are here for you as well. Let's take a look. Let's talk about things. How are you? How's your life? And a lot of the time, with the hardworking Asian parents, they are so tired the moment they open their eyes in the morning. They are exhausted already in the morning. And a lot of the time they are not aware of emotional support or other psychological support, or just making room to connect with the child is important enough, because they are working. They have a lot to care of actually in their family. So a lot of the time I think we are trying to engage the family, engage the parents as much as we can to make efficient treatment for the client itself. And that is also true when it comes to treatment here in the United States. We're trying to provide more of a family meeting, engage the family work, have parent consultation, parenting sessions and coaching. And, sometimes if they are open to family therapy, that's also an option too down the road. And there are many approaches to work with children, like drama, play, creative arts, talk therapy. It's, a lot actually. And because of the time, I'm just gonna stop here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I would like to move on to the next question. So, we've talked so much about, what mental health is and how our culture actually shaped it. So how does one become aware of their own mental health? It's a very broad, but it's a very specific question. Maybe I could have Dr. Annie Lee to help us answer this question first.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very, very broad question. When I think about how do we become attuned to our mental health, I think about ourselves as like, okay, I'm this one person, and how am I connecting with the different areas of my life? How am I connecting to my family? How am I connecting to my friends? How am I connecting to my work, my school? And how am I connecting to the things that, are activities, right? And so when there is that, when mental health is, the ideal is that when you have optimal mental health, you're able to make those connections and sustain them, and it's supposed to be very fulfilling. What may happen at times, and I think we see it a lot during the COVID pandemic too, and all the anti-Asian hate, is that those stressors, right, can really kind of impact our emotions, our thoughts, and our behaviors to the point where we start noticing that there's been changes in those relationships and connections to the things that I was talking about. And so the way I think about it is that being attuned to how those qualities of those connections are may be like the warning signs that I would say, to say, hey, let's be on alert here, because things aren't going well, things aren't optimal. For example, if you start losing sleep, right? If you notice if you're eating so much, if you're isolating and you become socially withdrawn from your family, from your friends or your colleagues, right? Those are signs. And we have to pay attention to that. And like for a lot of youth and adolescents, when they can't focus or they don't care as much about getting good grades or caring as much about their schoolwork, and they kind of default to, let's say, different ways of coping. And I hear this from a lot of parents, that he's just on his iPad all day long. He just wants to play video games. And in actuality, it's his whole way of coping, as an escape, to kind of withdraw from those connections. Those are cues. And I think that we need to pay attention to that, because if we are properly able to say, hey, maybe this is, depression, right? Or maybe this is, anxiety, with the proper approaches and treatments, we can restore those connections, to provide optimal, functioning and wellness. And I've seen, it's true that, with the anti-Asian rhetorics, with the, COVID pandemic, it has taken a toll on so many of us. We're nearing on the 3-year anniversary of this whole pandemic, and it's a collective traumatic experience. And I like to use the word traumatic because trauma is anything that threatens our well-being, physical safety, psychological safety. And when that is threatened, right, that's a big stress. And we need to kind of say it and acknowledge it to kind of give us some perspective of what we've been going through. So I kind of want to open up to Mika and Annalyn too, to share their thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lee. I'm enjoying this whole, I'm part of the AAPI community. I need this as well in a way, but definitely, in a way, if you think about your overall well-being, and if you actually, there's different dimensions when it comes to wellness and well-being, right? Like our physical well-being, our emotional well-being, our social well-being, intellectual well-being, vocational well-being, your job, your academic achievement, your financial well-being and spiritual well-being. And, when you take a moment, close your eyes right now and think about what are the things that's important to you, and how are you doing with the things that's important to you, and what are the thoughts and feelings that come up. think about that. Think about how are you doing actually in this moment with different dimensions of well-being and wellness. And I'm always a relational attachment approach therapist. So relationship and connection, it's really important. And I personally believe that when it comes to psychotherapy, it's always about relationship and relationship with yourself as well. And a little bit of the noticing, a little bit of the mindfulness toward people around you, toward yourself, toward your feelings and emotions, which is a big part that sometimes in Asian family, we don't address our feelings. No. We talked about achievement, we talked about career, we talked about 你吃饭了没啊? Have you eaten yet? But we don't talk about how are you doing? You seem to be a little upset. What's going on? So it's the day-to-day dialogue to implement those awareness, of kind of like, oh, I noticed something's going on, with my kids. Didn't talk, feeling upset. Maybe I should check in. My mom usually called me during this time. She didn't call today. Maybe something's going on. I should check in. So I think it's that kind of noticing, that can actually bring back the connection. Evelyn.
Thank you. So I use this like very similar to what Dr. Annie Lee and also Mika said, the biopsychosocial, cultural, and even spiritual model, all different aspects. It's very holistic as view a human, from all different perspectives. But I would just add one more, to what we already talked about is the trigger, think about like, am I experiencing a lot of social pressure right now, or am I in a high risk situation that can be detrimental to my own health, or, as simple as how's my physical conditions? Because we all know like a physical condition, poor physical condition sometimes can add a harm or negative impact on the mental health as well. Or, things as am I using, some substance or recreation drug a little bit more, am I drinking more, things like that. So it's just like a being reflective and be mindful of, triggers as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our last prepared question is, what are the steps that, we can look for, mental health support? Like we talk about so many differences between your specialties. What is the entry point? I'm going to pass it to, again, Dr. Annie Lee.
So I always think about things in the continuum, right? Because as a psychiatrist, I'm always quick to like, pathologize something because that's what my medical model goes to. And it doesn't have to be that way. I think that there's different approaches. It can potentially be like, mental health can be approached in the medical model. It doesn't always have to be either, because I also find that, when we think about, I highlight about connection and support, that can be sourced from anywhere. And sometimes that may be from attending a church group. You know what I mean? Any spiritual faith-based organization where you have that support, you have that shared experience, the lived experience, the narratives, and that can be very empowering and healing in itself. And then, for others, I think about like, the elderly generation, maybe just having them go to those social programs and, having a meal together can be enough. And then, for those that where those contexts and structure can offer that healing and supportive and therapeutic, approach, that's great. And sometimes you need a little bit more. Sometimes maybe you don't have that luxury of confidentiality and privacy where you need to kind of talk about that with someone, and it's beyond what a friend can offer, or a trusted loved one. And that's where I think maybe having someone who's professional and licensed to help you evaluate what is going on. Is there something deeper? And starting somewhere, where could that be online, where it could be a referral from like your primary care doctor, someone to navigate and point you in the right direction to get you the evaluation and say, okay, maybe this is more than just, just a stress reaction per se. Maybe this is, really an anxiety and depression. And then, having a professional clinician be able to address that and treated however it needs to be, sometimes including medication. There's different levels of care. And I do think that, not everyone has to go into therapy. Not everyone has to take medication. There's a spectrum and continuum that there's different points of entry for mental health services.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. I wonder if Mika and Annalyn would like to add something to this question.
Sure. And then I think definitely like a lot of the Asian Americans tend to actually use your support in the surrounding area, whether that is like an organization, friends group, family, church, or any kind of social organizations around you. Like we tend to actually seek out first, to our friends and family. If you feel like you need a little bit more than that, right, that you can actually consider seeing a therapist. There are different levels, right? Like you are considering seeing one, or you really need to see somebody, or you must go. There are different levels of severity when it comes to what's going on and whether you are functioning okay in your life. And it's always good to kind of check in with people who know you, actually, if they notice anything, right? If they actually feel like, oh, you're different actually than how you usually are. And if you are noticing that a lot of the time that your mood or your behavior is impacting your activity of daily living as well, right? You can't get your work done, you can't sleep, you feel just really sad all the time, that you have to cancel all your dates and going out with friends. You just can't anymore. And sometimes you need more than just friends to actually hold this emotion and thought for you. And there are different ways. And I think like we actually mentioned in the beginning, there are so many different entry ways to get into therapy. Sometimes you go to a PCP and PCP will be like, yeah, why don't you, try to look for mental health services or behavioral health services. Sometimes people have their health insurance through work. Work provide EAP programs that you can actually utilize through work for free. Sometimes you are in a school, you're a college student, or you're a grad student, you have school counseling center. And sometimes you just know somebody, friends, family, if they actually see a therapist, if they are engaged in any sort of mental health services already, you can reach out to them and say, hey, how did you actually start your therapy session? Where should I begin? You can definitely reach out to people you trust and feel safe to ask for the information. Other than that, definitely, practical thinking, just Google, and then just to go on Psychology Today. That's always a big platform that you can find a lot of the psychotherapists there. It's legit. And also definitely look at your insurance card, check in with, your insurance representative to see what kind of mental health services that you can actually utilize. That will be very beneficial for you. These are like the practical things that you can do actually.
Thank you, Mika.
I just want to add one important resource. This is a rollout that's been pretty recent. If you ever find yourself in crisis, if you ever feel like that you're at a point where life is not worth living, or you're maybe even contemplating or having suicidal thoughts, there's 3 digits. It's kind of like 911, but it's 988. This is this National Suicide Prevention Hotline, crisis hotline. And I don't know how many people know about it, but all you have to do is just remember 988, those 3 numbers. And there's always someone on the other line who's a trained professional to be able to talk with you 24/7.
Thank you very much. Adeline, do you have anything you would like to add on?
Just a little bit it is like, what Dr. Annie said earlier, mental illness is not the same as poor mental health. Like, I think we all need to agree on that. We understand that we all have, sometimes because of the stress, because of the pressure, going through some trauma, there will be a point that you feel like, oh, I need some extra help. And that doesn't mean that you have a mental illness or you are defeated, or you are weak. It's just like we have to assess our own stigma against the mental health first, like we need to reflect a little bit. Am I having the beliefs that I shouldn't go seek help, or I shouldn't do this or that because mental illness is so and so, so I would just say, reach out if you have any concerns, like for yourself or for friends or families, because a part of what we do is preventative work as well, right? You don't have to be diagnosed with a mental illness to see a professionals. So yeah, just be mindful and be aware of our own stigma, and we can go from there, I think.
Thank you so much, Adeline. We have about 10 minutes left, so there are a few questions I would like to just give to our panelists to answer. The first one is, it's asked by Bessie Lee. It says, internalized shame seems to have a particularly negative impact for Asian Americans due to the cultural notions of individual and collective faith. Deeply embedded in our family of origin and communities. What are the ways for us as individuals and as a broader community to avoid internalizing shame and also to release ourselves from shame we've already internalized? Let's start with Dr. Lee.
I'm thinking, my mind's going.
Oh, yeah,
No, but that being said, I do have to say that I want to echo what Mika said. You being here tonight is one way that we're moving the dial, right, away from shame. And you know, it's a process and there's no quick fix. That's the unfortunate part about it. The more we talk about it, the more we own it, the more we say it out loud, that's how shame kind of evaporates, right? Because we give light to the topic, we give space for the topic. And, you know, sometimes the work that I do with families and especially with teenagers is helping them, I think, recognize and reconcile this loss, the hope that perhaps the parents may be able to understand them, or that fantasy perhaps that, you know, the parents will change. Because sometimes the reality is that it may be hard for their parents to go there and do that work. It's just too painful, it's too traumatic. And we may not be able to change them, but what we can change is how we react to it and how we cope with it. And you know, a lot of times I work with teenagers to help them reconcile, like, you know, how do we cope with that feeling of loss of that fantasy ever happening, of that wish and that desire for their parents to change? And how do they kind of, you know, overcome that and cope with that? And that can be a very liberating, empowering process for them to be able to say, hey, I can take care of this myself and I will go to therapy. I will work on this so that I don't perpetuate those patterns of behaviors that have been maybe for their parents at work, it led them to survive, right? But here in the United States, growing up, it doesn't work anymore, it doesn't serve a purpose anymore. And in fact, it actually is maladaptive and not quite helpful. And so doing that work to undo that so that they can, you know, give, maybe when they become parents themselves, I'm a mom too, and I've been doing that work and realizing I can change that. I don't have to pass on that trauma. I can give something better. And that's hope and that's light. And that's one way. It takes time to overcome that shame.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. Mika, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, this is such a big, you know, question. And Bessie, thank you for asking that. Thank you for shining a light into this, you know, topic of internalized shame, actually, because whenever we talked about identity earlier, right, and when you know, internalized shame become part of our identity, how does that impact our self-esteem? How does that impact our self-confidence? And a lot of the clients, when they actually talked about all this trauma in the family, sometimes they feel shameful of talking about it in the therapy session as well. And then we'll begin to process the shames that they are feeling it in the sessions itself with the therapist. And creating a safe space with your therapist is so important for you to begin to process all this hidden, suppressed feeling of shame and guilt. Actually, these are two big emotions that people spend years talking about it, experiencing. And when you think about relationship with yourself, right? What is your relationship with those feelings that you're trying to hide, right? And sometimes we in therapy work through that a lot. It's a work in progress, actually, but definitely, like Annie was saying, you know, the more we talked about it, the more it's present. And there's different way how we can play with that. You know, talking about drama therapy perspective, we play with this shame. How does it look like? What is this role of shame in your life? What's your relationship with shame in life? And how does it look like? You know, how does it sound like? This is sounds like your parents. This is sounds like yourself. There's many ways in therapy that we can address that actually. Because of the time, I know we are running out of time, so I'm just gonna.
Thank you so much. We have another question, quick question. It's actually about it's about the impact of Asian hate crime. And I know, Adeline, your organization, Garden Hope, has been working closely with this particular issue. So I want to start from you. How do we as a community to overcome that?
Right. This again is a really big topic, I believe. So I think, just from my own personal, working experiences, what we do within our organization is we had a session to like openly talk about our own, experiences with Asian hate. Because if we can't even verbalize what we experience, how do we expect other people to verbalize or to openly talk about their experiences, right? So I think it is a long healing process as well, in which we are not thinking about our life, but also like how am I comfortable in this community? How am I comfortable to share my opinions and talk about openly, be vulnerable about my own experiences. So number one is, of course, create a space for us. We have to be the one actively creating the space for everyone to be vulnerable and to be comfortable in sharing. And also then is the non-judgmental environment, like Mika already said earlier. That environment is really important for us to create a space for us all to share. And then the trauma work comes in. How do we work with the people who have experienced Asian hate, and how do we process the intergenerational trauma that Dr. Annie Lee mentioned earlier, because it is an intergenerational trauma, right? The social pressure, the social trauma will be passed on to the next generation, and we are already seeing that today, and we have to recognize that it's not a fantasy that Asian people make up, right? It is a thing that we all experience and we see, so we need to talk about it. We need to be verbalized about it. So yeah, I think from my own working experience, those are the main points that we do. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And Dennis, if I can just briefly add, thank you, Adeline, for addressing the space. And I also wanted to mention a very important concept of safety. When it comes to addressing hate, right? When it comes to seeking support due to the discrimination and due to all this aggression that you might have experienced or your family might have experienced in the community, do you have a safe space? Actually, do you have a safe space to process what's going on, with you and with your family member? If you close your eyes for 1 second, again, think about what safety means to you. Do you have a safe space? Who comes to your mind? Those people who you feel safe with you, or space that you feel safe. It might be some sort of processing group, church friends, family, friends, your counselor, or, it can really be yourself. How do you actually create a safe space for yourself to hold, those intense feelings? In creative art therapy, we also kind of like emphasize on how our creativity and spontaneity actually support us into creating safety for ourselves. Do you journal? Do you write? Do you use music? Do you dance it off? Do you actually utilize, a blank piece of paper and just to draw down your anxiety, your depression, all this feeling that you feel, this anger that you feel when you are discriminated upon? Can you actually create a safe space for yourself? I think that's something that I, hope everybody can actually have a safe space.
Thank you very much. I do want to finish up by asking this last question. I feel like there is a lot of a conversation in the QA session that actually talks about being an immigrant. And early on, we actually touched upon this idea of like the language barrier. How important in your experience, the language barrier, the language, how do we choose to use services in English, or do we choose to use in another language? How important as a role for language it is in our mental health support?
Amy, go ahead. Yep.
No, I mean, I'll be quick about this one too. I think that there is something to be said about having similarities and representation when it comes to, it's all about coming down to safety, right? Where are you most safe? Is it going to be in your native tongue? Is it going to be with someone who identifies with, your cultural values and your aspects? Because ultimately you want to have that safe space. And I think, for some, it's a supply and demand issue too. I also think, there's just not enough, Asian language speaking mental health professionals. And this is my open mark. If you're in medical school, if you're in college and you're thinking about the mental health and you happen to speak another Asian language, we need you. We need to build the workforce. So there's that. And sometimes when we can't, we do have to use interpreter services. It's not ideal, right? Because there may be things that are lost with interpreter services. It's to me, it's just like, okay, it's better than nothing, right? It's something, it's still something. And so, we'll take what we can get, because anyone that is, going to be interfacing with mental health, we want to capitalize on that opportunity and make it as a positive experience as possible, so that they feel invited to come back. They feel invited to stay on. They feel invited to do the work. And sometimes just showing up.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Mika.
Yeah, I do wanted to just briefly mention also, like language barrier is definitely one of the, big reason why, mental health services being underutilized by a lot of the Asian American, because of, sometimes they are monolingual. They won't be able to understand and how to actually navigate the system, in a way. And that being said, the New York City Health and Hospital system, we always provide interpretation services. Actually, if you ever actually need to really seek mental health from somewhere, feel free to utilize the New York City system. There's clinics, there's also hospitals, and the interpretation services is there actually. And when you actually are requesting, more of a private therapy setting, you can definitely look for the therapist who actually speak your language if you feel safer, right? If you feel more comfortable using your own language. Clinically speaking, sometimes my client, even though they are bilingual in maybe Mandarin and English, sometimes they might feel more comfortable talking about emotions, talking about differences in English. And sometimes language is a weird thing, right? I speak English in a completely different way than when I, speak in Mandarin. And sometimes different language allow us to access different area of our brain that, people sometimes pick and choose, what do they want to express through. And I always save several spots for my Mandarin speaking only clients in my private practice because of the limited therapists are existing in New York, and I am very proud of myself to actually providing that space, attempting to provide that and make myself available out there, because I know that it's not easy to find a therapist that it's Mandarin speaking and have availability actually. So I think that will be it from.
Just a little bit adds up to what Mika and Dr. Annie Lee already mentioned, of course, the safe space. And then one thing that I'll just add is that be aware of what language you think or say to yourself. Because, like Mika said, when I work with the teenagers, sometimes their native tongue is English, but when it comes to, express their emotion, they might start, speaking in Mandarin because that's how they learned from the family line, or vice versa, their native tongue is English, is Chinese. But then once they start talking about emotions or talk about, other things that they're not comfortable with, they will start talking in English. So like our organization come in, we do bilingual services to all populations as, just to provide that space. And also, so I think, for people who are thinking about, going for counseling, one thing that we, if language is one thing that, you think about, then think about, what language am I talking to myself in, or what language am I thinking to myself in, which I think can be a determining, reason, or just a point to know what language of counseling that I need.
Thank you so much. That's our last question, and I really want to thank you, therapist Mika Lee, psychiatrist Dr. Annie Lee, and also counselor Adeline Zhao for joining us for this panel discussion. This is really just the very first beginning of a continuing conversation, and also bringing the awareness to the mental health. And I really love to thank you for sparing your time to be with us, and thank you for all the attendees who spare their time to join for this conversation. Museum of Chinese America will continue doing conversations like this so that eventually our community will benefit collectively together. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, that's it for us.
Okay, well, I just want to say a quick thank you, and I'm gonna stop recording, and then and thanks again.